For 150 years, we thought we knew Pompeii's story. In one famous house, archaeologists found four figures huddled beneath a staircase: a mother clutching her child, a father shielding his family. The mother wore a golden bracelet. It was heartbreaking. It was beautiful, and it was completely wrong. DNA analysis published in 2024 revealed the truth. All four were men. None of them were related, and three of them had ancestral roots in North Africa. The bracelet wasn't a fashion statement. It was probably the most valuable thing someone grabbed as they ran for their life. This is the real story of Pompeii's last 24 hours. Not the version from the textbooks, the version the dead themselves are finally telling us. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what was alive. Pompeii in 79 AD was not the gray skeleton of ruins you see in photographs today. It was a city drenched in color. Buildings painted in vivid reds, deep yellows, ocean blues. Elaborate frescoes covered the interior walls of even modest homes. Scenes of gods feasting, gardens blooming, lovers entwined. And the walls of Pompeii talked, not in the language of scholars, but in graffiti, scratched into plaster by ordinary people in their own words. One reads, "Successus, the weaver, loves the innkeeper's slave girl." Another simply, "Gaius was here." And one which still makes archaeologists smile. "I don't want to sell my husband." These are not the words of ruins. These are the words of people who had no idea their world was about to end. 20,000 people lived here. Merchants, bakers, soldiers, slaves. They had an amphitheater that could seat the entire city, public baths with underfloor heating, taverns on almost every corner, and looming above it all, Mount Vesuvius, green, fertile, covered in vineyards. The Romans knew it was a volcano, but they believed it was extinct. The rich black soil around its base was prized for growing grapes. No one alive had ever seen it erupt. In the bakery of a man named Modestus, an oven was fired every morning. On this particular day, he slid his loaves in just as he always did. He would never take them out. When archaeologists uncovered his bakery nearly 2,000 years later, the bread was still inside. Carbonized, but perfectly shaped, with the baker's own stamp still pressed into the crust. Time didn't just stop in Pompeii. It was buried mid-sentence. For 4 days before the eruption, the ground shook. Small tremors, the kind the people of Campania had lived with their entire lives. 17 years earlier, in 62 AD, a devastating earthquake had cracked open buildings across the city. Some of that damage had still not been repaired, so when the ground trembled again, most people shrugged. They had survived worse. But this was different. The tremors grew stronger, more frequent. Springs that had flowed for generations suddenly dried up. The ground itself seemed to breathe, swelling and settling in ways that made animals uneasy and children cry. What no one understood was that deep beneath Vesuvius, a column of magma was rising. Pressure was building in a sealed chamber of rock, and the mountain they had farmed, picnicked on and praised for its beauty, was about to release 100,000 times the thermal energy of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. It was just past noon. At approximately 1 in the afternoon, Mount Vesuvius tore itself open. A column of volcanic debris, superheated gas, and pulverized rock shot 15 miles into the sky. From across the Bay of Naples, a 17-year-old named Pliny the Younger watched in horror. He would later describe the cloud as shaped like an umbrella pine tree, a long trunk rising and splitting into branches at the top. It is the only surviving eyewitness account. Every second, 1.5 million tons of volcanic material poured into the atmosphere. Within minutes, the sky above Pompeii began to darken, and then the stones began to fall. Small at first, white pumice stones, pebble-sized, bouncing off rooftops like hail. Most of Pompeii's residents understood instantly that they had to leave, and most of them did. Estimates suggest that 15 to 18,000 people fled the city in the first few hours. They were the lucky ones, but roughly 2,000 stayed. Some were elderly or sick and couldn't travel. Some were slaves, chained or ordered to remain. Some believed the stone buildings would protect them, and some simply refused to abandon their homes, their shops, their entire lives. By late afternoon, the pumice had accumulated to 3 feet deep. Walking through the streets was like wading through gravel. Doors were blocked, roofs groaned and then collapsed under the weight. The stones grew larger, some the size of a fist, and the sky was now so dark that it was impossible to tell day from night. Those who remained retreated to cellars, to the basements of stone buildings, to any shelter they could find. They lit oil lamps, they held each other, and they waited. Pliny the Younger, safe across the bay, wrote, "A darkness came that was not like a cloudy night or a night with no moon. It was like the black of a sealed room when the lamp has been put out." Through the night, the earth never stopped shaking. Walls cracked, the roar of the volcano was constant, but sometime around dawn there was a pause, a quiet that must have felt like mercy. Some of those who had sheltered underground dared to emerge. They climbed over mounds of pumice into a landscape they no longer recognized. They thought the worst was over. They were catastrophically wrong. At 7 minutes past 7 in the morning, the eruption column collapsed. And what came next was not falling rock. It was a pyroclastic surge, a superheated avalanche of gas, ash, and rock fragments traveling at over 100 kilometers per hour at temperatures exceeding 500 degrees. It reached Pompeii in minutes. Death was instantaneous, lungs seared, muscles seized. The surge was so hot that it killed before the brain could register pain. In the house of the Cryptoporticus, 2 people were found locked in an embrace, one larger, one smaller. For over a century, they were called the Two Sisters. DNA analysis in 2024 revealed that one was male. They were not related. We may never know who they were to each other. But in their final moment, they chose not to be alone. In another part of the city, a guard dog was found still chained to its post outside the house of Orpheus. Bronze studs on its collar gleamed beneath the ash. It had tried to climb higher as the debris rose, but the chain held. Its owners had fled. The dog could not. Near the Nocera gate, 13 people were found in what had been a vineyard, adults and children. They had climbed over the pumice, trying to reach the gate, trying to escape. Among them was the youngest victim ever recovered from Pompeii, a child between 12 and 14 months old, based on the development of teeth that would never grow in. This single pyroclastic surge killed roughly half of everyone who died in Pompeii. Their bodies were found in the streets, frozen in the volcanic layer exactly where they fell. By evening it was over. 32 hours of destruction, 17 separate pyroclastic surges. Pompeii was buried under 14 to 17 feet of ash and pumice. The city was gone, completely. The coastline itself had shifted, and where 20,000 people had woken up just 2 mornings ago, there was only silence and gray. For 1,700 years, Pompeii slept. The Roman Empire rose further, then fell. The medieval world came and went. Empires were born and buried, and beneath the farmland of southern Italy, an entire city lay perfectly preserved, its bread in its ovens, its wine in its jars, its people in their final poses. In 1748, workers digging a foundation for a palace accidentally broke through into a world that had been sealed since the time of Christ. What they found changed our understanding of the ancient world forever. And then, in 1863, an archaeologist named Giuseppe Fiorelli realized something remarkable. The ash that had hardened around the victims had preserved the exact shape of their bodies, even after the bodies themselves had decomposed. By pouring liquid plaster into these hollow cavities, he could bring them back, not to life, but to visibility. The faces that emerged were not peaceful. They were contorted, hands covering mouths, legs drawn up, a child pressed against what was assumed to be its mother. And now, with DNA analysis rewriting these stories, we are learning that Pompeii was more complex, more diverse, and more human than we ever imagined. Today, 700,000 people live in what scientists call the death zone around Mount Vesuvius. It is the only active volcano on the European mainland. And volcanologists have calculated that the probability of a major eruption is increasing every year. Pompeii's greatest lesson isn't about the past, it's about the fact that we are always living in the hours before something we cannot predict. The baker didn't know it was his last loaf. The dog didn't know its owners wouldn't come back. And the two strangers in the house of the Cryptoporticus didn't know that their final embrace would be studied by scientists 2,000 years later. But here they are, still speaking, still telling us who they were. And that perhaps is the most extraordinary thing about Pompeii. It is not a city of death. It is a city that refuses to be forgotten. If this story moved you, subscribe. Because next, we're going to a place where an entire civilization's knowledge was destroyed in a single night. The Library of Alexandria. What was really lost? And who was truly responsible? I'll see you there.